Good evening. Welcome to the Mothi Center. I'm so delighted that you are all here to join us this evening. It's my birthday.
Happy birthday!
Again. So good evening, I am Abby Ledvina. I am the Executive Director here at the Mothi Center. I am pleased to welcome you all to the Miller Family Lecture in Human Rights and Public Understanding. The Mothi Center is an independent nonprofit located here on the University of Wisconsin Green Bay campus. It was founded by Father Richard Mothi as an ecumenical center, reflecting Father Mothi's desire to bring people of goodwill together from all different communities of faith. Today, the center's programs bring people together for community conversation and interfaith connection among college students and community members across Northeast Wisconsin and beyond. This lecture series embodies that mission. Through the generosity of her daughter, Susan Nutzel, the Miller Family Lecture in Human Rights and Public Understanding embodies that mission. It honors the life and work of Sherlyn Miller. Well known in the Green Bay community for her many contributions to human flourishing and public understanding, she and her late husband, Norman, consistently championed civil rights and respect for others. Working to counter racial discrimination and anti-Semitism through educational programs, community collaborations, and decades of what can only be described as courageous goodness, we are honored to have Sherlyn as part of our community. Sherlyn is watching from home tonight, but her daughter Susan is here. So join me in thanking Susan Nutzel. Lastly, I would like to send a greeting to all of those who are joining us virtually, and especially those who are gathered for a satellite viewing of this event at the Wisconsin Institute of Public Policy and Service in Wausau. Thank you for being with us. For those of you watching by webinar, as the evening progresses, please take advantage of the question feature on Zoom, and if you have any questions for our guest, we will do our best to pass those along to the speaker. At this time, I would like to invite Dr. Robert Pine, our program director, to come up and introduce tonight's honored guest, Asha Rangappa.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. And I have to say, I'm assuming in a room this size that it must be someone else's birthday too. So if you're that person that sat out there and when we all sang to Abby, you said, oh, it's my birthday too. Would you raise your hand just so we know? Are you there? Is there anybody? Nobody? Okay. Yeah, I'm just glad we didn't miss anybody. I was worried. Because it would feel bad, right? It would just make you sad. If everyone, it's next week? Okay, well, come back next week. We have another event, and you can do that then. So I want to thank Abby for allowing us to really change some of the things that have been happening here at the Mothi Center with her creative vision, her openness to change, her openness to collaboration. This is the third of these Miller Family Lectures that we've been able to have. And we're able to have them, as she said, through the generosity of Susan Nutzel and the Miller family. We're deeply grateful for that. But there's a legacy of this series that goes back further, all the way back to Norman Miller's first Public Understanding Week in 1941. And that family has had an influence in our area and beyond for a long time. And that series is happening here now thanks to the generosity of Susan Nitzel and the flexibility and openness of Abby Ledvina and the Mothi board. We're deeply grateful that that's able to continue. Thank you. We are excited to welcome Asha Rangappa for the Miller Family Lecture in Human Rights and Public Understanding. Jill, as you're going into the sound booth, I've got a big echo that I'm hearing, and I think others are as well. So I'm going to keep talking until it's better. Is it better now? I think it is. It's not better. They say it's still not better. I don't know what it's going to take. I have no idea. But thank you. So Asha Rangappa is senior lecturer at Yale University's Jackson School of Global Affairs. She is former associate dean at Yale Law School, and prior to her academic career, she was a special agent in the New York division of the FBI, specializing in counterintelligence investigations. She appears frequently on network news as a legal and national security analyst. She's an editor for Just Security, a member of the Council of Foreign Relations, a security fellow with the Truman National Security Project, and about a dozen other things that were too long to include. At Yale, Asha teaches courses on national security law, Russian information warfare, and leadership and ethics. She's the author of The Freedom Academy, a best-selling online Substack publication about disinformation and its impact on democracy. She also co-hosts the legal podcast, It's Complicated, with Renato Mariotti. Please join me in welcoming Asha Rangappa.
Okay, just make sure I'm situated. Thank you to Susan Nitzel, to the Miller family, to Robert Pine, the Mothi Center, and all of you for having me here, and to all of you that are watching remotely. It's such a pleasure to be here at this critical time in our democracy to talk about what is happening. What I want to talk about today is what I believe is the single greatest threat facing our democracy right now: disinformation. I say that because democracy at its core is about thinking through solutions together. It's about disagreeing on what those solutions look like and how to get there, but ultimately reaching a consensus based on some agreed upon rules on how that consensus will be reached. These ground rules are what undergird everything we do in a democracy: how we pass and enforce our laws, how we reach verdicts in our judicial system, and how we conduct elections are all just a few examples of how we use agreed upon rules to reach consensus. But for those rules to work, we need something even before that: a shared reality. If we begin at fundamentally different starting points on basic facts, or the problems we are actually finding solutions for, or a disagreement on whether the rules even work, then consensus is simply not a possibility. In fact, when we start from diametrically opposed versions of reality, and when one or both of those realities is ungrounded in facts, the potential for people to believe that democracy and the rules that underlie it don't work increases exponentially. And that's when people start taking matters into their own hands, or start looking for something or someone to replace the entire system. I have 3 goals in this presentation. First, I'm going to explain how disinformation works. And to do that, I'm going to give you a crash course in Soviet subversion theory, known as active measures. Second, I'm going to explain why these operations are so successful today. Spoiler alert, part of the problem is technology, but part of the problem is us. Finally, since all of that is pretty depressing, and I now have a pair of sweatpants that I can put on, I'm going to leave you with a few thoughts on what we can do to be resilient to this threat and perhaps even turn it around. So, as a former FBI agent who specialized in counterintelligence investigations, I served in the New York field office. Counterintelligence involves monitoring foreign intelligence activity in the United States. Just like our CIA engages in espionage abroad, our adversaries and many of our allies conduct espionage here. The goal of FBI counterintelligence is to figure out who the spies are, what they are up to, and how to stop them. The vast majority of cases I worked as an agent were what the Bureau calls perception management operations. That's just intelligence speak for propaganda. It's the broad term to describe any operation designed to influence American attitudes and opinions in a way that benefits the host country. And as you're about to see, foreign propaganda and disinformation has been happening in this country for a very long time. It was just pretty low down on the totem pole of what we consider a threat. In fact, I joined the FBI right after 9/11, when terrorism was the biggest threat facing the United States. And that was also in the very early days of the internet and before the social media explosion. And I have to be honest, chasing around intelligence officers who are recruiting journalists and planting stories in newspapers and immigrant communities, to me just didn't seem like that big of a problem. Fast forward 15 years. When news began to break about Russia's interference in the 2016 election, I had unique insights into what exactly they were doing. Russia has been sowing discord since the Cold War. Its tactics and goals today are no different than those of the KGB. They're collectively known as active measures. And they're following the same old playbook, but they just have new tools to do it. So what's the playbook?
KGB is a department that specializes in planting false stories and forged documents to distort others' perception of reality. It is the department that deals in disinformation.
The main purpose
Yuri Bezmenov is a former KGB agent.
follows the statement of a very ancient Chinese philosopher, Sun Tzu, who was born 500 years BC, before Jesus Christ, who said something to the effect that fighting war on a battlefield is the most stupid and primitive way of fighting a war. The highest art of warfare is not to fight at all, but to subvert anything of value in your enemy's country, be it moral traditions, religion, respect to your authority and leaders, cultural traditions, anything. Put white against black, old against young, I don't know, wealthy against poor, and so on. Doesn't matter. As long as it disturbs society, as long as it cuts the moral fiber of a nation, it's good. And then you just take this country. When everything is subverted, when the country is disoriented and confused, when it is demoralized and destabilized, then the crisis will come.
So what he is describing there is the Soviet subversion theory, which is you destabilize your adversary from the inside. You just let them implode. And I'm going to show you exactly what their theory involves in terms of their playbook. Great. So you can find more videos and lectures of Yuri Bezmenov online. And just so you know, he's a weird guy. He was a KGB spy who was stationed in India, posing as a journalist. He defected to Canada and eventually settled in the United States. He became very conservative and began giving lectures on the dangers of communist and Soviet active measures to the John Birch Society, of which he was a member. Bezmenov has some personal views which might seem controversial today, but his insight into Soviet active measures is spot on. And very briefly, active measures are an attempt to use your enemy's weaknesses against itself, sort of an invisible form of judo. And in the process, as Bezmenov notes, to subvert everything of value that your adversary holds dear. In fact, the Soviet active measures theory posited that with sustained effort, a society could be completely subverted and taken over within the span of one generation. The theory has 4 stages, which I'll go through quickly. So the first, as you can see in this slide, is demoralization, and this is the longest stage. This seeks to impact every aspect of an adversary's society, including people's consciousness, how they perceive the world, and their material existence, how they experience the world. But another key target of Russia's active measures has been the institutions that support democracy. That includes our political processes, the courts, and also the free press. During the ideological battle with the United States during the Cold War, the Soviet Union sought to delegitimize all of these to convince both Americans and especially marginalized communities that were on the political left and people in the Soviet Union, as well as people around the world, that democracy does not work. The second stage, if I can get this to move, I can't get this. Okay, second stage is destabilization. This stage is a little bit shorter. So demoralization breaks down a society's trust in institutions, in leaders and experts, and ultimately in their fellow citizens. And once that happens, you can enter this period of destabilization, which as you can see is slightly shorter. And this is where normal processes break down. The agreed upon rules that I talked about before no longer work. Politicians may capitalize on this disillusionment to come to power, and this is a very ripe environment for populists and demagogues. And people are looking for an alternative. As the system breaks down, chaos, uncertainty, perhaps violence increases. And so you enter a period of crisis. And you remember in the video he mentions that's the crisis is what they're looking for. In this stage, institutions are paralyzed, the government no longer works or delivers, there may be political violence, leading to calls of law and order and the appeal thereof. And often there is a major event that allows for the granting of emergency powers to bring everything back to normal. And you can see there's like sort of people looking for a savior, civil war, invasions, like kind of entering that kind of stage. Then we get to normalization. Things are brought under control, but this is a new normal. Basically, this describes a police state. What I think is really interesting in this part of the theory is the detail here that loyalists who help bring the leader to power are actually eliminated at the stage. And that might sound odd, but if you study authoritarianism and the dictator's playbook, this is a pretty standard play. Because the loyalists are essentially the sharks circling the waters who pose a threat to the power center. So if you look at Saddam Hussein, Idi Amin, Kim Jong-un, all of them did this. And in fact, I just read a foreign affairs piece, and I think it's in the current issue, that 56 senior officials in Putin's circle have died since the invasion of Ukraine. Many of them from falling out of a window. And this was also what Stalin did as well. So as you can see, this theory, which spans at least a couple of decades, is playing the long game. And that's not surprising. After all, Russians are the master chess players. And if you look at the operations they use to divide and conquer, we're talking about stage 1, the demoralization phase, they too have long time horizons. Remember that that was the one that was longest, that took a generation, 15 to 20 years. And one great example of this is Operation Infection, which you might have heard about. Operation Infection was one of the Soviet Union's most successful operations to undermine the legitimacy of the US government. It was the conspiracy that the AIDS virus was created in a lab by the Department of Defense as a weapon to kill gays and blacks. Importantly, the KGB studied the strands of mistrust within black and gay communities in the 1980s, when AIDS was at its peak and being blamed on these groups. Within those communities, there were rumors that this was a plot of the US government. The Soviet Union took advantage of that mistrust and something that a few people were prone to believe, and found a way to make that conspiracy mainstream. The first thing they did was to plant a story in an Indian newspaper, this one. It's called The Patriot. And this one was ostensibly written by, a journalist in India. I mentioned that Bisminov was, in India. That was a very common seeding ground for disinformation operations. For two reasons. Number one, it was an open society. It was a democracy that had free speech. And number two, it had an abundance of English-speaking outlets. So they could seed these narratives and then it could get picked up by Western press. And that's what happened with this Patriot story. This story started getting picked up. Eventually, it was repeated in over 200 different outlets in 80 different countries. And 4 years later, this story actually made the evening news with Dan Rather in the United States. And so this is an example of another outlet that picked it up. Even today, this rumor circulates in certain circles, definitely in other countries, in Africa. It undermined our humanitarian efforts. It's undermined our vaccine efforts in various developing countries. And you can see this is a sign from, I don't remember what country it's from, but that's one that was, against the United States. And the Operation Infection encapsulates why disinformation is such a potent threat in America and other Western countries. Because it takes advantage of one of the strengths of a democracy, which is its open society and freedom of the press. And that's something that we cannot turn against the adversaries who are doing this. It's not something that we can do tit for tat. For example, can the US really run a disinformation operation in Russia? This is why we call disinformation an asymmetrical threat. It takes what we consider a strength in our form of government and turns it into a weakness. So you could take the man out of the KGB, but you can't take the KGB out of the man. Putin is a former KGB officer and he understands active measures very, very well. This man is a man named Valery Gerasimov, and he is Putin's chief general of the armed forces. And Gerasimov began to understand the value of asymmetrical warfare while fighting in Chechnya against non-state actors. This was guerrilla warfare, which the Russian army was not trained in, and he began to realize that these guerrilla fighters, these non-state actors, were giving the Russian military a run for their money. And then he saw things like the Arab Spring, which was facilitated through people communicating on social media, at that time on Facebook. And he realized that asymmetrical warfare, and in particular asymmetrical warfare that is waged in the information space, can open up a new front that would allow a weaker country to gain an advantage over its adversary. And the goal here is to, again, just like active measures of the KGB, to create chaos and upend the domestic affairs of other nations without firing a shot. So let's talk about social media. I mentioned that I investigated perception management operations, and that was still in the analog era, meaning people still got their news from actual newspapers. And at the time, it was kind of hard to investigate these cases. News outlets in the United States have a First Amendment right to publish whatever they want, even if it's false. But we now have original hurdles. For one, these platforms present themselves as neutral sites, as digital town squares that are deserving of the same kinds of First Amendment protection as real town squares. And they are protected by laws that shield them from liability. We also have no meaningful government regulation on social media, like we do for television, for example, through the FCC, as we are seeing. And finally, there is no transparency into the platform's algorithms, which shape what we see. And what you see is different than what I see. So how did we get from where Facebook was helping bring down dictatorships, like in the Arab Spring, to where it became a weapon for dictators? Part of it is that we never had time to get a handle on the negative externalities of social media before it became an indispensable part of our lives. When a technology takes a long time to become incorporated into a society, you start to see what it has the potential to do, the good and the bad, and you can start correcting for it. But as you can see, this is a chart that shows how long it took for various inventions and technologies to saturate 75% of American households. And that's the threshold for it being considered ubiquitous. And if you look at the very right side of that chart, you can see that both the cell phone and the internet rapidly became a part of our lives pretty much within a decade. And we were convinced that this was a technology that was going to bring us together. And that's what we were told. Okay, how many people here remember when there were only 3 TV networks? Right. Okay, well, the first thing to fracture in the information ecosystem was cable news in 1996, I think. And all of a sudden, people could choose to get their news from multiple channels, from different places. Social media came on the scene in 2005, and this was a further fragmentation on a completely different scale of news sites. And the internet exploded with hundreds of news sites that began to eclipse traditional news sources. And you can see this chart from Pew, which shows the portion of users of these different platforms who regularly get their news on those sites. And that percentage is increasing. In other words, more people, this is sort of why newspapers and local newspapers have started to be decimated, because this is where people are getting their news. There's also a demographic shift. And you can see that younger people especially are increasing their news consumption from social media. And I'm curious, do we have anybody here who's 29 or under? Okay. Is this ringing true for you? Okay. And then you can see the different demographic shifts for the other age cohorts. Okay, so I said that there were 2 reasons that this is so potent right now, and there's a lot of blame to be placed on social media, but these platforms are not the whole story. Remember the part of Soviet active measures where it said it's a 2-way street? One of the things that Bizmenov says in his longer lectures is that you cannot subvert an enemy that doesn't want to be subverted. And I know from doing intelligence operations myself that you only try an intelligence operation if you see a vulnerability in your target that can be exploited. So right now, all of us are viewing the world through distorted lenses that allow us to be manipulated. And our own actions are actually making that possible. To see how this happens, I'm going to explain a concept that political scientists call social capital. Social capital is the value we get from our relationships and networks. Just like there's financial capital and human capital, there is social capital. This concept has been around for a while, but in 2000, a Harvard professor named Robert Putnam wrote a groundbreaking book called Bowling Alone. I highly recommend that you read this. It's a fantastic book. And what he wrote was that social capital is created in two ways: what he calls bridging and what he calls bonding. I'll start with bonding. Bonding is the value we get from social groups who are similar to us. So one example of bonding social capital from my life is when my parents arrived in America from India in 1970, the first thing they did was figure out who all the other Indians were within a 2-hour radius of us. And this is, that kind of immigrant community and reaching out to other immigrants is a very classic example of bonding social capital. And it's what Putnam calls society's superglue. Bonding social capital gives us security. It acts as a social safety net. And it offers what he calls specific reciprocity, meaning you help people in these groups because you know they're going to help you. You know these people and you have that connection, that very tight connection to them. Bridging is the value that we get from social networks of people who are different than us. One example of this are universities, or even this talk. It's bringing together people from very different backgrounds, experiences, and beliefs. Bridging social capital fosters innovation by allowing ideas to travel farther faster. Part of the reason that universities bring in international students and why the US has been such a leader in innovation is because we harness the talent and allow it all to flourish here from a lot of different places. So bridging social capital crosses social cleavages, and in doing so, it creates what he calls generalized reciprocity. We talked about specific reciprocity before, and this is generalized reciprocity. And generalized reciprocity is having the back of people that you don't really necessarily know in person. It is a general feeling of goodwill towards your community. It's the idea behind pay it forward, the tikam olam. The idea that you do something because somehow it's going to come back to you, but it's not because people owe you something or a tit for tat. So Putnam calls this kind of trust in society that society's WD-40, because it helps society operate more efficiently. When people just generally trust each other, things flow easier. You don't have to come up with formal rules and enforce things in court, and you can operate on general norms of honesty. In fact, bridging social capital is associated with higher civic engagement and civic virtue, which are both essential for a democracy. Putnam writes, and I'm quoting, "People who trust their fellow citizens volunteer more often, contribute more to charity, participate more often in politics and community organizations, serve more readily on juries, give blood more frequently, comply more fully with their tax obligations, are more tolerant of minority views, and display many other forms of civic virtue." Conversely, experimental psychologists have shown that people who believe that others are honest themselves are less likely to cheat, lie, or steal, and are more likely to respect the rights of others, end quote. So here's the thing. These are both necessary for society, bonding social capital, bridging social capital. But bonding social capital has more negative externalities than bridging social capital. If you have too much bonding social capital, too many in-groups, and not enough bridging social capital to offset it, you get factions, you get tribalism, and you get policies based on mistrust. Basically, you get a society that is based on us versus them. So let me ask you a question. Do you think social media generates more bonding social capital or bridging social capital? Yeah, no, not only are newspapers going extinct, but people can curate their news feeds however they want. On the user end, you can block and hide the content you don't like and like the content that you do. And remember when I talked about how democracy is built on sharing the same reality? Let me ask a question. Those of you who remember the days of 3 news networks, how many of you watched the Watergate hearings in Congress? Okay. Was it shown on all 3 networks? Yeah? Okay, would you have gotten a fundamentally different picture of the hearings or the underlying facts from watching one network versus the other? It was the same thing. It's just like a camera, like sitting there showing it, right? And consider how that shared reality impacted that event and the history that flowed from it. It created a largely bipartisan consensus about the crisis in government that was taking place. That's no longer true. We can see that a lot of our bonding is happening along political lines. In fact, studies show that our partisan identity now eclipses our racial and religious identities. That is sort of the primary way that Americans see themselves. This chart shows how political polarization from 1994 to 2004. So the purple area in the middle is the overlap, and then you have the other outliers. And then again from 2004 to 2014. And so you can see that polarization has been happening for a while. This is not new, it's been going on. But you can see that it's much more marked in the second decade here than in the first. It's wider in this last one. And I don't think it's an accident that social media came on the scene around 2005. This is a great visual from the Washington Post about polarization in Congress going back to 1949. So the red dots are Republican members of Congress, the blue dots are Democratic members of Congress, and the gray is basically the amount of bipartisanship that existed during that Congress in terms of like legislation, etc. And like the chart that I just showed you, you can see that the polarization becomes much more pronounced in the mid-1990s. It looks like cellular mitosis. And so for the young people who are looking at this is not how it has been. For most of this is what you believe is the way it is. I mean, it is this way, but this is not how we have traditionally been in our government. So what does this mean for social trust? So our social trust, our general social trust, that bridging social capital that builds that, is at a historic low. The General Social Survey reports that in 2018, only 34% of people believe that most Americans can be trusted. And it's the lowest percentage since 1972. And I double-checked the most recent number with the General Social Survey, and it has stayed the same. So I guess the good news is that it hasn't gone lower. Younger people are less trusting of others than older generations. So there is a age generational demographic. There's a great Pew study that came out. This chart is from one that was from May of this year. And I'm blanking on the name, but it's if you just do Americans Trust and Pew Research, it will come up, and it slices and dices it by a number of different things, but definitely the age cohort, younger Americans are less trusting than older Americans. And if Putnam is right that social trust and civic engagement are correlated, then it mirrors a finding from 2017 that also found generational differences in the importance of living in a democracy. So you can see that we are very much in that crisis point, or approaching that crisis point that, that the Soviet subversion theory that maybe 10 or 15 years ago might have seemed laughable, but now is really not. It seems very plausible. So to bring this all together, being divided, whether it's along partisan, racial, religious, or any other dividing line, makes our adversaries' job easier. They don't even have to cede anything, really. All they have to do is look at what we are already doing to ourselves and dial it up. And they do. Even in this last week, there are studies that Russia and China have capitalized on the immense polarization that has been caused by the murder of Charlie Kirk to basically poke both sides and get them riled up. So social media makes it very easy to do that. Now, I promised I'd end on a positive note with action steps on what we can do, and so I'm going to leave you with 5 things. And I know there's a lot of text in some of these slides that I'm going to put up, and I'm happy to make these slides available if you want to go look at them later. So the first is educating yourself on disinformation, which you are doing now, and start identifying when you are being manipulated. This is a public service announcement from the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, which was circulated before the last 2 elections. And essentially it's, trying to raise awareness of this. And what I would say is the main takeaway here is to check your sources and try to think about what is the agenda of the source that's giving to you. Do you even know who this is that is sharing this? This one is really interesting. Schools no longer teach rhetoric, but it's important to learn how manipulative language works. There are rhetorical tricks that are designed to get you to bypass your critical thinking skills so that you arrive at a conclusion that someone else has made for you. Here are a few propaganda techniques, and these were identified by something called the Institute of Propaganda Analysis that was trying to raise awareness in the lead up to World War II, when there was a lot of Nazi and anti-Semitic propaganda that was flooding the airwaves here in the United States. That was the time of, for example, Father Coughlin, who had a very popular radio show. So this isn't new. And that radio was a new technology then that was allowing for the dissemination of these ideas much farther than it had been previously. And they were looking at ways to combat it. And so you can see some of these rhetorical, devices that are used. You may recognize them from certain narratives that you encounter today, but they are really important to recognize. And Jennifer Merchika, who we talked about, Robert, also this book at the bottom is she has a whole book on it, and it's a great book to read as well. Third, remember that social media platforms are designed to maximize attention and engagement. That means that they want to keep you on their sites as long as possible because this is how they make money. The longer that you're there, the more that eyes that come on the ads that they are putting in front of you in your feeds, and that's their revenue stream. That's why it's free for you, okay? Somebody's making money. And if you're not paying, then there's another way that they're doing it from your attention. Studies have shown that social media can be as addictive as cocaine or gambling. That the dopamine rush that you get from engaging on social media, it is specifically designed to be addictive in that way. One way they do this is to prioritize emotionally charged content in their algorithm, because people respond when they are emotionally triggered. You engage more. You hit a like button, you put in an emoji, you write some angry comment, you share it. And can you guess which content gets prioritized the most? Rage, anger. Anger and rage make money for social media platforms. Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen testified to Congress that Facebook actually weighted angry emojis 5 times more than the like emoji in their algorithm. That means that any content that made people who saw it angry was then prioritized in the algorithm and shown more often to more people. Remember also that things that make us angry activate our fight or flight response, which essentially bypasses our critical thinking skills. That's your amygdala. Your lizard brain comes online. And so the next time you see something in your feed that pisses you off, see if you have enough presence to notice that you're pissed off and use it as a cue to step away. Finally, and I think this is for all of us, but I think especially for younger generations, remember that social media is not real life. Social media, because of what I just described, is showing you the extremes of our society, and much of it is not even authentic, as I've just shown. You can't verify that these are even real people and that it's not Ivan in St. Petersburg. So don't project what you see on social media onto the real world, because that is how it engenders the mistrust. Because you see what's happening and then you think that that is who you're interacting with. This is one of my favorite cross-pollination theories. There's a relationship expert named John Gottman. If you have read Malcolm Gladwell's Blink, he's in there. He can watch a couple argue for 5 minutes and predict with 95% accuracy whether or not they will get divorced. He has a theory about relationships, which he calls emotional bank accounts. And what he says is that in a relationship, positive interactions with your partner create emotional reserves. And when you have a conflict, you draw on those reserves. So you have to make sure that you have enough reserves in your emotional bank account to withstand the withdrawal. But here's the thing. He also says that you need 5 positive interactions in order to generate enough reserves to break even on a single negative reaction. So think about that. And I think that this theory holds for our societal interactions. If we are screaming at each other on the internet, or maybe even in real life, there have to be enough reserves. And that's the bridging social capital. That bridging social capital has to exist in order for that conflict to be able to be managed and for our democracy to sustain it. So, to that end, talk to strangers. Come to talks like this. Go to places where you're bonding but bridging at the same time, like a Green Bay Packers football game. In fact, sports and the arts are a great way to generate bridging social capital, because they are activities that you can connect with other people, but it's not based on those tribal cleavages. I mean, I guess your sports team is sort of a tribal cleavage, but you get what I'm saying. It still brings people together. And that leaves me with this last point. Consider your media diet. I think it was Utah Governor Spencer Cox who said last week, "Go touch grass." means is think about the kinds of media consumption you are doing and whether it's healthy for you and for democracy. And I love this media diet pyramid because, you know, I don't know if they still have the food pyramid anymore at the Department of Education, but it is similar to that. And it is basically saying that what you consume is going to impact how you show up in the world and in this democracy for each other. And as you can see, to kind of the point about sports and the arts, that the bottom, that, you know, the fruits and, I think they found the fruits and vegetables at the bottom, right? When I was growing up, it was like all carbs at the bottom. But, you know, now the fruits and vegetables are doing things, actualizing, being out and being around people to leave our screens and actually engage. And then, you know, there are other ways that we can engage with screens, and what I like about this particular pyramid is that it says that some are actually better than others. That the ones that actually involve interaction are better than the ones that just involve mindless doom scrolling on our social media feeds. So I will close with this quote. And I love this Tocqueville quote because it really gets to the heart of that idea of social trust and why that is the building block of a democracy and why that is exactly what disinformation tries to destroy. It's a very it's sort of obvious when you start thinking about it, because when we don't inhabit the same reality, we retreat into our separate cocoons. That makes consensus impossible. We give up. We look out for me instead of the we. And once we do that, we leave a vacuum for someone else to fill. And we may not want that person. So I'm going to leave it there. I think I did okay on time, and I'm going to let you ask some questions.
We have some time for questions. Thank you. So we have two microphones. There's one back there with Zakaria and one over here with Abby. I've got questions on Zoom that are coming through here that I'll relay to you. One of my first thoughts as you were talking about the weighting on the algorithm is if you all would just start hating our website, just do angry emojis, and then right below it, just kidding, we love you. That would help. It would be kind of everything. But one question that came through is there any way that the government can intervene with regard to social media without messing around with the First Amendment? And maybe I'll broaden that just a little bit to say, how are we doing with the First Amendment and government intervention these days?
So the answer to the question is yes, there are ways of intervening. Because I think there is a false framing of social media regulation as being equivalent to censorship. Like the only way you can regulate is to take stuff offline. But as I've explained, a part of what makes social media unique is that it has certain features like virality, right? Like it can let things like get spread, like a contagion, right? Like we've all gone through the pandemic. And it also can go to it moves very quickly. And one of the best phrases that I've heard is that you have the freedom of reach, you have the freedom of speech, but not necessarily the freedom of reach. And, if I go to a town square, I'm allowed to stand on my soapbox, I think, still, and, say whatever I want. In a normal town square, it would be the people who show up that hear me, right? And I'm accountable for what I say. And so if we're really going to try to, if these platforms claim to be digital town squares, then we should be able to regulate in ways that that approximates a real town square, which also means that certain kinds of speech doesn't, get artificially valued. I mean, one of the things that's really interesting about our First Amendment, the jurisprudence, is that it's based on this idea of a marketplace of ideas. Have you all heard that phrase? What does that mean? A marketplace of ideas means that you throw your ideas out there and rational people are evaluating the value of this, like you do when when you value companies in the stock market, and the best valued speech, the best ideas are going to rise to the top, and the worst ideas are going to go out of business, okay? That presumes that you have consumers of that information who have perfect information, like they know who's providing the information, where it's coming from, etc., which social media doesn't do, so there should be more transparency on that front. But also, like, everybody, everybody gets one vote, really, on what is good speech or not. There's no person that gets to send, artificially inflate or come with a megaphone and shout out other voices. And so there's just, I think, a real disconnect in how we think about these platforms, and censorship is not the only option. You can have it, but you have to give people an opportunity to play on an equal playing field, and these platforms have done it. So before the 2020 election, I believe, Facebook changed its algorithms in order to give more weight to reliable news. And so it became a much more civilized platform for like a month leading up to the election. It also got more boring, and people weren't on as long. And so after the election, they went back to what they were doing because it didn't, that doesn't make them money. So to answer the question, there are ways, and I think also we need to think about what value we're maximizing. Because there are different kind of values that you can maximize in these algorithms, like Facebook showed in that you can value democratic values. But the question is, how do you incentivize these platforms, which right now we trust Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk to police themselves. And so, that is not going to work in the long run.
So I added a little bit right at the end there of my question about how are we doing on the First Amendment. We didn't quite get to that part. So let me restate that one. I heard an Egyptian joke once that there is freedom of speech there, but not freedom after speech. and it seems that we may be getting into something like that in some, when an entertainer giving a monologue gets fired for mocking the wrong person. That's scaring people right now. Should they be scared?
They should be scared. Yeah. They should absolutely be scared. And you should be scared because, what we have, I just mentioned Zuckerberg and Musk, are controlling, can control what you see on, or China, in the case of TikTok, can control what you consume on these platforms. But actually, the same is also true for some of these networks, which are huge conglomerates that are being increasingly centralized into, single ownership. So this is one of the issues, right, is that we have a cap on the number of households that any one owner or company can reach. Media company, and it's like 39%. And this is what they want the FCC to waive so that they can acquire more. And there is that cap. I personally feel like 39% is still really high, but we do that because once you allow for one actor to essentially have a monopoly, this is what happens in Russia. So Russia, like the media is owned by private actors. They're just oligarchs, and they all report to Putin, right? So as long as they further what he wants, then they can, keep their businesses and keep it operating. They don't end up falling out of windows or whatever. And it's just not a healthy society. So what I'm saying is that is partly can only happen with the complicity of other private actors. many of which are caving right now and acquiescing, complying in advance, because legally these are not, it's unconstitutional, right? And so, that's where the pressure needs to be, or guardrails put in place to prevent that kind of concentration from happening.
So if you have, I'm seeing some hands right here while you're coming to them, Abby, maybe to Dr. Kramer right here in the front.
Oh, we don't need a microphone.
No, you do need a microphone for Zoom. Go ahead.
Thank you. Asha, thank you very much, first of all. I wonder if the situation you just described isn't already happening here in this country with oligarchs. I think about the Citizens United case, which I still think is one of the worst things that ever happened in American jurisprudence, that gives such an extraordinary amount of power to major corporations. And the idea that their voice is equal to my voice is absurd. It's absurdity. And when you were talking about bridging and bonding, I kept thinking about that, the people who are shaping opinion have a megaphone, and all we have is our tiny little voices. And they have an almost infinite amount of money to spend through their various back channels of contribution. The other part of this, and these, I know they seem like two separate thoughts, but are connected, is, as a recently retired college professor, the tendency of our students nowadays to live on their phones, consuming what they're being fed. A lot of it, of course, being paid for by these major corporations. And not to sound paranoid, but I think we all feel a little paranoid nowadays, and I think, which is the reason why you were brought here to give this very lecture, we all worry about our democracy and are we heading in a terrible direction. I wonder if there's something positive you can say about something hopeful now that I'm giving such a negative story.
Yeah.
So, what do we do next? Yes.
So, I mean, this is kind of gets to turn the weakness into your advantage, right? And one of the things about our media ecosystem that's really great is that there are ways around, these oligarchs, in the sense of, if these networks are capitulating, I mean, honestly, network television is like on its way out. It's a new system, so like whatever. And I think this is where we need to really, this has to be a collective effort to sustain local journalism, to sustain, investigative journalism, to, a lot of independent outlets online. A lot of these people who have been fired or let go, Jim Acosta, people that you like and you trust, now, or, maybe Hassan, these people have created their own media platforms, and we're really fortunate to be in a place where we can do that. So I would just encourage you, I've been looking, I try to, when I see journalism that I think is educating me, ProPublica, Wired, I think is something that I'm subscribe. I think we've become so conditioned to things being free that it's oh my God, paywall. And I get it, not everybody has it, but pick one, or, and some places it's just like The Guardian, for example, just asks for a voluntary donation, you could do it $1. And so I think we need to participate in that, and we can create a new media ecosystem that allows people to be informed. This technology can work for us, but we have to have a commitment and organization. It's just, I think we're disorganized compared to the big business interests.
We've got a question that came from our satellite viewing center in Wausau at the Wisconsin Institute of Public Policy and Service. Is disinformation the same as a lie?
So disinformation is an intentionally false story. So it's a lie.
Okay. Okay. All right.
It is, most people who study this do distinguish between disinformation, which is the deliberate lie, versus misinformation, in which somebody may not intend, so, you might share something, you might share a news story, and, that might not, it's misinformation because it's not accurate, but it's not, intentional. So there's the intent element that people ascribe to it as well.
Okay. Now Right here, Abby. Kristen has. Sorry, we'll get you next. Go ahead, Kristen.
Going back to the beginning of your presentation, I'm confused about Russia. So apparently for decades, they've been playing these games with us. What's the point? It's still not nice to live in Russia. Like what are they, how does it benefit them other than to look at us and say, well, America's got problems now too? I feel like it's just so much energy that's going into playing with their enemies instead of trying to make life nice in Russia.
Yeah.
I don't.
Great, so it's a great question. So I think the goals are different than in the Cold War and now, right? So in the Cold War, it was an ideological battle between capitalism and democracy and communism. And so this was about, how we were going to spread these, and so this was looking at our policies of containment to prevent the spread of communism. So this was an ideological battle. Because of that ideological battle, in many ways, I think the Soviet Union was limited in its effectiveness, right? Because at some level, you have to get people to buy into this ideology. The thing with Putin is that this is not an ideological battle. He can play all parts of the political spectrum. And the difference now is that, whereas in the Cold War, it was sort of two superpowers, right? And this is what he remembers. He's a KGB officer. Basically, he has PTSD from when the Berlin Wall fell. Okay? There's a great PBS two-part series called Putin's Revenge. I assigned it to my class. But basically, Berlin Wall falls, he's assigned in Dresden, people surround the KGB headquarters, torches and pitchforks, and he calls headquarters, and the answer he gets is, Moscow is not coming. Okay? And then he returns to a Russia where the KGB, all-powerful KGB, is just like, they're nobodies. And I think this personal slight, but also what he sees as this fall from, the superpower status, is he believes like kind of the greatest affront to like the Russian state. And so part of what he wants to do is kind of rebuild this, empire. He understands that Russia cannot compete, especially with the United States, militarily, technologically, economically. Right? So Russia's here, the US is here. So if you can't come up here, what do? You bring your adversary down. And so one of it is to do that, and then also he understands that the alliances of the West make them more powerful together. United, they are stronger. So if he can fragment them all, then he can divide and conquer and kind of do the same thing, but on a more geopolitical scale, right? So this is why, in trying to influence these different areas to bring people to power that are going to essentially undermine the system or become more allied with his, with the autocrats club or whatever. Is that helpful?
Yeah, totally. Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, no, thank you.
Thank you again for being here and being a voice of reason. I had a question about an earlier slide, and I'm hoping that I missed something, or that I'm hoping I missed something. But there was the point where it's like a 2 to 5 year gap, and then should we reach this point, the only two things left are invasion or civil war. Like, can I get an option C there too?
This is the Soviet subversion theory, right? Like what they do to destabilize to a point where it's like the society collapses. I don't know what the third option is. I think, there are probably people who've studied, what happens like at other sites. I don't know if there's any professors in here who know if there's an option C. I don't know. I don't think we're there yet, if that's what you want. I mean, I think, the other piece is that I think the bigger takeaway, so let's leave the active measures playbook, but, to look at arcs of authoritarian society, like authoritarians and how they come to power, et cetera, is, and Professor Tim Snyder, I don't know if you follow him or read him, you know, he's really great. Ruth Ben-Ghiat is another professor, she's an NYU professor, she wrote a book called Strongman, and these are all, like, educate yourself, because you will then see the tactics, it's like, it is literally textbook. But, you know, one of the things is that I think you can always extricate. I believe you can always extricate. It just gets harder and harder, and the cost of doing so goes up. You know, whereas in, you know, a very, very early stage, you know, maybe you get, you know, attacked on the internet, okay? At a later stage, you're gonna get fired from your job. At a later stage, you're gonna get jailed. You know, at another stage, you're just gonna get disappeared. And so, you know, what the lesson is people need to not comply and stand up in the very early stages when it's much easier to do so. And that's why Timothy Snyder says, you know, don't obey in advance, because most of the time the power is given voluntarily. And then you're in, you know, after speech, what was it?
No freedom after speech.
No freedom after speech, yeah, so what, you know, but there are societies that do that too, right? So if you look at Chile, which had a dictator for 17 years and it extricated itself, but it took a lot. So I think there is always a C option, but it requires a lot more effort and focused attention. It requires coalitions, you know. So I think there are a lot of things, but it's a lot of work.
It's hard.
Secretary, you have another one over there, and then front row.
It's harder to do farther along.
Correct.
Just to add on to that, are we on a faster timeline though because of the social media culture than the active measures playbook? Than what was listed up there?
I mean, I think definitely that phase one is much faster now, right? I mean, pretty much anything can now be used to like divide and, you know, because of this. So, I think if the conditions are right, yes, right? But again, what I'm trying to convey is that whether the conditions are right are in our power. In other words, you know, it's still not sweatband time, okay? It's like we need to believe that we still have agency. And I think this part is really important, is that part of that demoralization is to convince you that nothing you do matters. And I see this all the time, like when I'm on, you know, on social media, and I will post something about something that's happening, and I'll say, this is not legal. Okay, this is what the law says, this is not legal. And I'll get a bunch of people saying, you know, the law doesn't matter anymore, like we're all gonna die. And it's like, well, you know, I mean, that's just not helpful, right? Like that kind of fatalism and defeatism, but there is a part of what the goal is here is to wear you down and make you believe that there's no point to resist or fight back or, you know, nothing matters. It's like a nihilistic, you know, view. And so, I don't know where I started with that, but it is faster, but I think it's important to always remember that the power is still in our hands, you know, and we're still empowered if we want to do something about it.
Secretary, front row.
Hello, I just want to say thank you for coming out again. I think as a 20-year-old who does get some of their information from social media, I do want to play a slight devil's advocate and try to say that there are like a lot of people who put out their first-person experiences, especially when, let's say, for example, people in Gaza who are posting about things that are happening with them directly. So I think it's really important to like highlight that and watch those people. And with that, there also does come some information. So my question is, how do I, as a young person who does get their news from social media, have a good middle ground, I guess, of getting that information while also trying to listen to people's voices and not get misinformation?
Yeah, great. And I think that's such a great point, right? I mean, there's a saying that like technology is neither good nor bad. It's really about how you use it. I mean, this is, you know, and what the example of Arab Spring is one of, you know, that technology can be used to bring down dictators, right? And When you look at things like, the Me Too movement in 2017 or Black Lives Matter, I mean, social media has the potential to create transparency and shine a light on things that many of us may not have known before, or people may not have realized or understood the scale of. So there are a lot of things that happen. I mean, I really think that that media diet is also part of what it is. Like if it's part of what you do to inform yourself about something and you're careful about, the sources that you're using, I think it's a great tool. I am on social media because I often have to respond to breaking news. And there is no other way to really get what is happening and also to know what my colleagues, like what my other lawyers and law professors are saying about some breaking thing, and it's really helpful to me. But I think you need to know what is your purpose for using this technology. Like, what are you using it for? And if it's just like, kind of just passive zombie, consumption, then that is not gonna be helpful. So I think like intentionality, I guess is what I'm saying. Like be intentional about what you do with it. And I for sure that there are things that are useful.
Other questions? Right back here with Jess Adams right there.
Hi, Asha. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I just wanted to say thank you for sharing that Robert Putnam book. I think I talk about Bowling Alone once a month since I graduated in undergrad 20 years ago. So excellent resource. But in talking about the bridges and bonding, I'm thinking about the people here today, and I'm certain that all of us are really excellent at both bridging and bonding, but I'm thinking about the people who aren't engaged and they're more just kind of engaging in that like tribalism. How do we get them to become more involved in more of the bridging and bonding? Thank you.
I mean, I don't know, that's a harder question. I mean, I think there's a lot of different ways to do that. I mean, you could go to things like how we design public spaces. Where was I recently? It was a space that didn't have Wi-Fi. Right? I'm completely blanking, but I just remember it's a place that and this kind of gets to the intentionality thing, like deliberately did not offer Wi-Fi in a place that also offered other ways of interacting and engaging with people as a means to kind of do that. So I don't think there's like a one easy answer for that. Obviously, if you have children, I think you just impact your sphere of influence, right? Like, I just don't know that there is like a big society-wide thing. We're gonna be like, everybody's gonna bridge now. Like, it's just not, I think we can affect our small corners of the world, right? And take action where we can with our own behavior. When, we have kids, like teach them, use that media diet pyramid a little bit. If you notice things or if you can create opportunities to do it. Another thing that social media is great for is to use it as a vehicle to bring people together, like this talk, right? I'm guessing most of you found out about this on some sort of social media platform. So, create events or opportunities for people to do exactly that.
Short one right here.
Excuse me, a recommendation and a question, and I think it goes to the question of the Soviet Union and to some of the other things you said. But I wonder if you would recommend to people Alexei Navalny's book.
Yeah, I have not read his book.
It's a memoir. The title is Patriot,
okay.
And the subtitle is Memoir. And I heard it on an audio book. I think reading it might be a tough, long slug. But in an audiobook form, there is one out that's very good, and it comments on some of the other things that you've done. So if you haven't read it, you
Thank you.
might want to think about that.
I will definitely do that. And also the CNN documentary on Navalny is very good if you haven't seen it. And then also on the Putnam, Netflix has a documentary called Join or Die, where he goes, through like the research and stuff. And he wrote a book, like his book is kind of depressing because it like ends and it's like, yeah, there's no civic engagement. And then he wrote another book called The Upswing, which talked about the me and the we. So there's a few books that you can read of him as well.
Yeah, I've been trying to tell people, never abandon your ability to question.
For sure. And to, I was thinking, I'm glad you said that, because I was thinking the other thing that we definitely need, and it gets to the cost getting higher and higher as we get farther along, is how important moral courage is in our moment. And that is definitely something that we all can exercise in our lives, right? In whatever way, in some small way or a big way. We see people doing that. And it's really important, I think, to celebrate those and really highlight those. Because I think there's a lot of it's like if it bleeds, it leads, and then the algorithm showing, but there are really inspiring stories of people stepping up, and courage is contagious. And that is a prophylactic against, the democratic erosion that we're seeing.
So last night at dinner, one of the students asked you about news sources. What do you read? What do you trust? How do you build kind of a conglomerate of sources that can be trustworthy? And then related to that, what do we do at a time when we're not sure we can trust government sources the way we used to?
So my sources, I subscribe to my hometown paper, the digital version. I just like seeing, it's helpful to see both what's happening on the local level, because it kind of brings me down and I'm like, okay, there's just like real people doing real stuff. Because I think we can get too eclipsed by everything happening on the national stage. And, it's also a way to support local journalism. It's also a good way to kind of check the headlines, right? Because the local papers will also talk about what's happening on the national, but it's less sensationalized. And so it's a good way to kind of keep calibrated on the news generally. My personal sources are just kind of the big mainstream, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post a little bit less so now. The Atlantic, I think I mentioned last night. Foreign affairs, foreign policy. I follow a lot of national security stuff, so I found this. But everybody has their, I think one of the great things is there's so many sources of information, right? We still have a very robust First Amendment. And again, let's not get fatalistic, right? There is still a lot out there, and I think this is about exercising our responsibilities as citizens to begin to be responsible consumers and figuring out what are the things that are going to inform you to best be able to engage in society. Did you have a second part?
Yeah, the second part is...
Oh, what do we do about...
when we can't trust the government information so much. For example, FBI statements right now. Well, I'm getting you in trouble, I know. FBI statements right now, or maybe a press release that seems, grandiose. It sounds like a report about Kim Jong-un's golf game. Right when you see a press release out of a high office being way.
The truth is, where we are entering an era where, I think it's going to be harder. Because people are being fired for reporting accurate information. I think, though, what's interesting is that there's still. I think we're still in a society, in a government and society where things can't be kept under wraps for too long. You know what I'm saying? There are still transparency mechanisms, right? And this is again where the channel for sunlight is the free press right now. That is it, and that is why it's the first, it's one of the, like that, there's two big channels for Sunlight. It is a free press, and it is popular protest. And those are the first things to get clamped down on, because they have the potential to raise awareness or bring facts to light that people don't realize. So I think it's a bad place where we can't trust the government and, you know, what it's putting out, but I don't think we're yet where it's like, you know, we've always been at war with East Asia, you know, and there's nothing else we can do. That's a 1984 reference, but like, I wish
Shout out to the Free Press. Jess, I saw you waving your hands. These ladies are with Wisconsin Watch over here.
Ooh, yay.
Very quickly say what it is, Jess.
We're a nonprofit online news organization. We're free. You mentioned that local news isn't free. Hi, thank you. Wisconsin Watch, what's that? Nonpartisan, nonprofit online news organization. We've been around 16 years, but we're just starting a local bureau up here in Northeast Wisconsin. And so we have our first editor and reporter here today, Miranda Jen. So please consider checking us out. Everything you're doing completely aligns with our values, and we feel like you're like a spokesperson for our organization. So thank you.
Thanks, Jess.
Wisconsin Watch.
So please join me in thanking Asha Rangappa. Just to say, the slides that Asha was displaying will be part of the recording that will be available and will be posted to the Mafi website within a few days. Okay, so let us get through the weekend, but thank you for allowing us to do that. As we wrap up, I'd like to take just a minute to thank the members of the Mafi Center team who made this evening possible. Again, it's her birthday. Abby Ledvina, thank you. Sitting here in the front and scrambling to make sure that audio and everything else has been going well, and making sure that the reception that we had before came off perfectly, and to make sure that there were enough chairs in the room, and to make sure that all the marketing was there and informing you, and to make sure that everything. Jill Olson, our assistant. We have James Johnson back in the corner, our Director of Community Engagement. Thank you, James. And three wonderful student coordinators, Zakaria Kasim over here, Rosalind Vera, who is back there running the Zoom. There's Yaz. Thank you. And Jasmine Pulse, who was working, where's Jazz? You're pointing, she's in there? I don't see her.
She's doing a little stick right now.
Oh, okay. So Jasmine also was working to make sure that everything went well with the reception and marketing. So please, again, thank you for your support, all of you. So as I was sitting there thinking about what we do, I was looking at the faces here of people I know. You all are doing some great things, and you're still doing them. I know that many of us have felt tired and have felt disillusioned and sometimes disoriented. But I know a lot of you, and I know the work that you continue to do. And I won't shout it out, I won't call out individuals, but I want you to know that we see you and that we cheer you on, and thank you for coming and rallying together here tonight. I was thinking, Susan, with regard to the continuing work of your family, that in some ways we, like you, are driven by a fierce and sometimes angry hope. And that is not a bad thing. You know, that we would continue to feel in our gut a protest and want to do something about it, keep doing it. One way that we can keep doing it is to keep gathering and hearing more. I've got a couple of things coming up. Where is Christina? There she is. She's going to be here on the 25th talking about traveling the Camino de Santiago. And I hope you're able to come out and to hear her. We also have, and I don't know what I did wrong here, Jill, I messed something up. Faith and Immigration, a dialogue presented by the Bayside Interfaith Group. I saw Matthew Sullivan over here somewhere. There he is. He's a part of that group. They're going to be talking about immigration from the perspective of multiple faith communities. And I don't know what I did wrong, but there he is. There's Morgan Shipley, who's going to be talking about being spiritual and not religious. That'll be on October 16th. On the 31st, or I'm sorry, on the 29th, Sergio Gonzalez talking about No Safe Harbor, redefining the parameters of migrant justice in America. And then next March, mark your calendars, Nicholas Kristoff, March 4th here at the Motley Center. So some wonderful things coming up. Again, keep doing the good work that you're doing, and please keep coming out